In Exodus, God is the liberator of the oppressed, bringing whole peoples from deathly conditions to a land flowing with milk and honey.
Isaac's son Joseph and his brothers grew old and died, but their children stayed on in Egypt, where they became a very large family. Later on, a new king began to rule, but this Pharaoh didn't remember Joseph, and he didn't like God's people, the Israelites. The Pharaoh made them into his slaves and beat them, and made them work harder and harder.
Hosanna, save us! Please, God, save us! Hosanna, Hosanna! Please, God, rescue us!
God heard them. God remembered God's promise to Abraham. God would look after these Israelite people. God would find a way to set them free. One day Moses was looking after sheep when something caught his eye. A bush was behaving very oddly. It was flickering with flames, but its leaves were not burning up. Moses took a closer look.
Moses!
Moses leapt back.
Yeah, the bush is talking to me.
I have heard my people's cries. I have seen their tears. So I have come to rescue them. Go to Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go free.
I'm afraid.
Don't worry, Moses. I will be with you.
Moses tried to get out of it. He used many excuses, but God prevailed. So Moses went to Pharaoh.
Pharaoh, God says,
God? Never heard of it.
God says, let my people go free.
Why should I? I don't want to. Won't do it.
So he didn't. So God gave Pharaoh 10 warnings called plagues. First, God turned the river Nile into blood. God! No one could drink that water. But still Pharaoh would not let them go. So God made frogs come hopping and leaping and jumping. In your bed frogs, in your hair frogs, in your soup frogs. All over, everywhere, frogs.
Make them go away! Then your people can go.
So God took the frogs away. But Pharaoh changed his mind.
You can't go.
Then God sent zillions of gnats. But Pharaoh said,
No!
So then God sent swarms of flies, buzzing in your eyes, flies. And after that, sickness, and horrible boils, and huge hailstones, and a storm of locusts. Then darkness when it should have been day. Until it seemed like the whole world, creation and everything was coming undone, falling back into darkness and emptiness and nothingness. But each time Pharaoh said,
Make it stop! And then I'll let them go.
and each time when God made it stop, Pharaoh changed his mind and said,
Actually, no! You can't go.
finally, Moses warned Pharaoh.
Obey God, or God will have to send the worst thing of all.
The oldest boy in every family in Egypt must die. My people will be saved.
God told God's people to take their best lamb, to kill it and eat it, and to put some of its blood on their front doors.
God will see the blood and know that the lamb died
That night, it was just as God had said. Suddenly, piercing the darkness, echoing down through the corridors of the palace, came a blood-curdling scream. Pharaoh's oldest son had died. At last, Pharaoh did what God said.
Get out! Get out! Just go away! Go! Go!
And so that very night, Moses and God's people fled out of Egypt and out of slavery. They were free at last. They escaped into the wilderness. They didn't know the way.
God knows the way and will show us.
I will bring you to a new home, a special land. I will look after you. I am with you.
God sent a big cloud for them to follow, a pillar of smoke stretching up to the sky. It moved in front of them as they walked and shaded them from the blazing heat of the day. And when it was time to rest, it stopped. All through the cold desert nights, it kept them warm, glowing like fire. God led the people through the desert to the edge of a great sea. They were just wondering how to cross it. Suddenly they heard a terrible thundering and pounding. It sounded almost like horses' hooves. They shaded their eyes to look back and screamed, "Oy vey!
It sounds like horses' hooves!
It was horses' hooves. Pharaoh and his army were coming to get them. Pharaoh had changed his mind again.
I've changed my mind. Get my slaves back. Now!
Pharaoh charged out into the desert after them, with 600 of his fastest horsemen and every single chariot in Egypt. What were God's people going to do? In front of them was a big sea. There was no way around it. There was no way through it. They couldn't jump over it. They didn't have any boats, and they couldn't swim across. It's too far. They would drown. And they couldn't go back. So they did the only thing there was left to do. Panic.
We're going to die!
Don't be afraid.
But we're going to die! And there's nothing we can do! Oy vey!
God knows you can't do anything. God will do it for you. Trust God and watch.
But there's no way out!
God will make a way.
Another minute and it would have been over. But then the strangest thing happened. God made the pillar of smoke move. It moved behind the Israelite people and hid them from the Egyptians. Then God sent a strong east wind to blow all night. It blew on the water of the big sea. It blew to the left and it blew to the right, until it blew the sea into two towering walls of water. And there, right through the middle of the sea, a muddy pathway opened up. And then God's people walked across on dry land. When the Egyptians tried to follow, the wall of water crashed back down on them and swallowed them up. God's people were safe. They danced and laughed and sang and thanked God.
Hooray for God! Thank you, God! We thought we were doomed, but you made a way of escape.
God's people would always remember this great rescue and call it Passover. But an even greater rescue was coming. Many years later, God was going to do it again. God was going to come down once more to rescue the people of God. But this time, God was going to set them free forever and ever.